Hello everyone and welcome to the 5th episode in my React for Beginners tutorial series. Now in this video we are going to be talking about state in React. Now I've kind of talked a bit about this, but this actually is one of the most important concepts behind components, I guess, and props maybe, but basically components can actually store their own state or store their own variables in a sense. And what that means is we can actually have kind of values that can be passed between components, and your whole website can be more dynamic with that. Because if a component can tell, like for example, if it's on or if a button can tell what color it is, then it can take care of changing its own color, which will simplify the code in the long run. So just to show you what I mean, basically I will show you how to use state, and then we will do 2 examples. And then so let's go ahead and just open, let's create a new component. So notice we have this my component.js. I'm going to go ahead and remove this, which hopefully shouldn't. I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to actually create a new component by creating a new folder. Let's just make it color, or we'll make it increment button. And then in here, I'll just create a new file, increment button.js, and then I guess we can make a CSS, and now we have these 3 files. I'm gonna go ahead and close this for now so we have more space. So as it is always great to get some practice actually writing out this code. So all you need to do is declare constant increment button, and then set it equal to an arrow function, and then you want to export default that increment button down here. And then of course this button itself is going to have to return some JSX. So what we are actually going to return is a button with class name dot, we can just generalize here, and then let's put some text in here just to make sure we're all good and working. So I'm going to come here in our app.js. I'm going to go ahead and import this increment button like this, the increment button, or that. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and remove these hello world and all of this. And I'm just going to include only the increment button here in our JSX. So in order to go ahead and start up the website, I'm going to cd into our directory. It should be like that. And then I'm going to run node or npm run start. Perfect. So starting our development server, it'll open right here. That. Okay, so we get a little button that says test. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and do an import /increment button.css. Actually, make sure that's the right, that's the right format. And then I'm going to come here into the CSS file, and let's just go ahead and make our button a little bit bigger. So let's give it a width of 20 rem, just to test. Yeah, okay. Let's give it a width of like 10 rem, give it a height of like 4 rem, and then let's give it a font size of 5 rem. And you can probably tell I'm not the greatest at CSS. I tend to use a lot of rem, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just probably a habit. I should learn a little bit more about the other viewport unit or the other units of measurement, but for now we'll just stick with this. So we got a little cool test button here. You can click it. It doesn't do anything right now, but we now have that. So this increment button is just returning that. Now there is actually a way to have this button increment a number. For example, it starts off at 0, and then when I click it, it goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to wrap this all around a div. Just grab this, and then I'm going to put in, we could do like an H4 or something, increment. Yeah, something like that. So this button will be able to increment itself. So in order to store state in React, what we need to do is first on the first line, we need to import, and we need to do this object import statement from React, React, spell. And then we actually need to import a function, and that function is called use state. Now this is with specifically function components, and this is something called a hook. Now a hook allows us to basically do a bunch of different things. Like in the next episode, we are going to explore many other hooks, like use effects, which I don't know why it's not. Yeah, use effect like this, or I think that's the main one we're going to explore, but we're going to look at some other hooks basically. But for now, we will be using use state. Now, in order to create a state within our button, we will create an array and set it equal to use state. And use state takes in a default value. So since this will be the number, it'll just be 0, since the increment starts at 0. And what we actually pass into this array is called, this array is actually a array unpacking statement. Now, I think I already talked a little bit about it before. If we used props, like for example, if we used props in here, we would do this is equal to props, and we would do an object unpacking statement where we have test, test2, and this would equate to props.test2, props.test. Well, it's very similar with an array unpacking statement, except the first thing you put here, like A and B, will correspond to the 0th item or the first item in the array, and then the B will be the second item in the array, if that makes sense. And useState actually returns an array with 2 different parameters. So we get whatever we want to name it. So we could say count. And then the second thing it passes is a function called setCount, for example. And we can literally name this whatever we want. It returns these, or whenever you unpack an array, you can give it whatever names, the variables, whatever names you want, since it's not an object. So we have count and setCount. Basically, what this will do is this right here is a variable that has our count, which starts at 0 because we passed it in as the default value. And then setCount is for updating that, because we can't actually, believe it or not, and that's why I declared it as const here, we can't say count is equal to 5. And you'll get an error with that. Cannot assign a constant variable, and count is constant, just like that. So you'll notice we can only use count and read it, and then we can update it via this function. So instead of putting 0 here directly, I'm going to go ahead and put the value of count just like that. And we reload and look, it's the same. And what I'm going to do now is this button, as with many things, has a on click event, which looks like this in our JSX. And then you can set it equal to, once again, you can set it equal to some JavaScript. And you can actually pass a function into this. So I'm passing an arrow function into this button. Look, it doesn't crash. There's no error. And what we have to do is now say set count, and then we could say count plus 1, for example. So in doing that, you'll see all we did is we created a div. This is just cosmetic here, and we have a button right here. This button on the inside, this may be a little bit hard to unpack, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this part first. On the inside of the button, we are simply embedding these brackets here, which just means inject JavaScript, and we are putting the variable count. Count is a number, and I'm going to pop here. Count is a number that starts off with 0. Why? Because this function useState takes in one value, and that is the default value for whatever you put here. You could have, for example, just to help get this thing straight, so you could have name, set name, is equal to use state Matthew, for example. And now this name variable will start off with the value Matthew, which is a string. And the set name function will update the value of Matthew. And notice this is a standard here. You should name it like this. There's no developer who doesn't, no reasonable one. But you could name this whatever you want, obviously, because this is array unpacking. That's why we can put whatever we want in here, which usually is the name of a variable and then set, and then the name of the variable in camel case, since this is JavaScript. That is the common standard for how you use state, but you can use this however you want. So like I said, if you had the name, you could have a name, set name, and then you could set it to a string, or you could set it to an object. State can be anything because this is JavaScript. So we have this count and set count is equal to use state 0. And here in our button, we are simply setting the inner text to the count variable. And then onClick is a property, onClick like that. Notice it's camel case because this is JSX. And then we set it equal to another JavaScript injection, which just is an arrow function on the inside. And then that arrow function calls set count, count plus 1. What we're doing here is we're updating the count to the current value plus 1. And how React works itself is every time a piece of state gets updated, React will perform a re-render. So notice as soon as we run the set count, it'll update the count variable and it will re-render this button right here. Only this button. Nothing else on the page will get re-rendered. So if we have, a bunch of components all around our website, only this little piece will get re-rendered. And that's because of that thing called the virtual DOM, which I talked about back in the first episode. So like React virtual DOM. This is what I was getting at. Whenever you have a piece of state that changes, this red little dot here, for example, this red dot is a component and one of its pieces of state changed. What it's going to do is it's going to have to update that component and all of its children and then re-render. And it's not going to have to touch any of the other site. And this is like kind of, I guess you don't necessarily need to know, but as a developer, it's always nice to know. And especially, it does become need to know at a certain level because you need to know how your site is handling re-renders. That way you don't accidentally re-render your entire site and that will cause major performance hits. There are certain ways to write code in React that allow you to re-render the fewest number of times necessary, just like this. So this example was basically we have this state and then we can update it. Now, basically that was the first example and we will now move on to the second one, which is a color changing button. I don't exactly know how I'm going to do that, but I think it's just going to be a toggle button. So let's go ahead and create yet another component. It's always great to have practice writing these components. So let's say toggle button or something. This is a bad name. So color toggle button. And then color toggle button .js and then .css. And let's go ahead and do I still have these open? I'm going to close the increment button files and I'm going to close the editor or the file explorer. And I will once again import color or /color toggle button.css. And I don't know why my computer's going into Vim for that, but and then before I'm going to go ahead and just import it. I'm going to import it in place of card because we're not using that right now. So we are now importing the color toggle button, but we're not actually exporting it in here. So let's just create it really quick. Color toggle button is equal to this, like that. And then we export to default color toggle button, just like that. Again, you should be getting used to this. If you're not familiar, go check out previous episodes on components. And then inside, we are going to go ahead and just return some simple JSX. Let's just do a button. So we have this button here, and then and then this is actually why I'm going to go ahead and change these other files a little bit. So increment button is going to return this div with the class name I keep messing that up. So class name, don't forget you can't use class in JSX as increment dash button. And then here in the increment button styling, we are going to have to say dot increment slash dash button. And then as a child, so it's the same here now, but now this styling won't interfere with our new button. So we will have this button and it'll be a class of uh, toggle button, color toggle button, just like that. And then this button itself, we'll just give it a test value for now, or maybe click me. Or in fact, here, how about this? We will pass in the actual text of the button, since we're not going to be changing it in the props. And then we can just say const text is equal to props, which then we could put text like that. So again, we use this object unpacking, and then it's auto formatting for me, which is fine. So we have this button, class toggle, and then let's go ahead and open up our CSS here. So dot color toggle button, and then let's just give this a good styling. But first, I'm going to go ahead and add one to our website just by adding like that, color toggle button. And now we have a very tiny button with nothing on the inside because we need to give it text, which is just going to be a string. We could say click me to toggle color. So you'll see that we have this click me to toggle color. I'm going to go ahead and just for purposes of this video, add some margin at the top. That way we get some differentiation. Let's go ahead and say font size 1 rem as well. 3. There we go. So, and then for now, we will not change anything else because this is actually a case where I think I'm going to use some computed styles. So let me just quickly make sure that this is working. So background color is black, for example. Will that actually change the background color? Yes, it will. Okay. Except we're going to have this outline. I don't care. This is just a very crude styling with, just the proof of concept. It's a prototype. So in here, we are going to have this props, and then we're going to have some state. So import use state from React, just like that. And here, we are going to create our variable. So const toggled, and then set toggle is equal to use state. And since this is a variable, or since this is a Boolean, we're going to start it with false. And then what we can do is we can actually say const styles is equal to an empty object. And then we could say styles dot styles dot color or background color is equal to, and we could say we could do a toggled ternary, and then we could do black, or I don't know, is this white by default? We will figure that out. But so I think that should be okay. Yep. And then we want to say styles dot color is equal. And again, I'm repeating myself here. This is not necessarily dry code, but sometimes you have to, or sometimes it's okay, especially since this is a test piece of code here. Getting an error. Let me make sure. Yeah, that was just that. Sometimes if you get errors and then you fix it and you save, it still shows up. Just try to reload. It might have just been a phantom error or like, a lingering error. So we have this styles here. And what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and set the style to the styles, just like that. Oh, yeah, my bad. So notice now that we have toggled set to false. If I set it to true, it'll now be black with white text. And if I set it back to false, it'll be white with black text. And again, I'm not setting any of these styles in here. Notice the styles still apply. There's still a margin. There's still font size. But this portion of the styles is computed for the reason that we need to compute it whenever we press the button. So it's best to put the styling here in our JS. So if you're not familiar, again, go back to the second episode, or I think the third one, we talked about computed styles in React. So basically, whenever we click this, so on click is equal to this, and then this is an arrow function. And all we need to do is set toggle to not toggle. And again, this whole series is predicated on the fact that you have basic JavaScript knowledge. So if you don't know not what it does, I'll quickly explain these concepts. Not basically inverts this. So if toggle is true, then not true, not toggled is false. If toggled is false, not toggled is true. Basically, whatever this Boolean is, it flips it. So what it'll do is it'll toggle it. In other words, if it's false, it'll go to true. If it's true, it'll go to false. So, and then this question mark with this colon here is called a ternary operator. What it means is we are setting the styles.background color to something, but that something is computed on the fly. So specifically, we have a Boolean called toggled. So what we're checking is toggled. Notice there's a question mark, so toggled. If toggled, then return black. If not, return white. So basically, if our button is toggled, then make the background black. But if it's not, make it white by default. That is what this syntax means. Again, basic JavaScript knowledge. I highly recommend you look it up if you are not familiar and you are still confused at this point. But this whole button should be ready. Click that, click that, click that. Just look at that. It toggles between black and white. I don't want to do too much, a little jarring, but that's basically the component. And quickly before I wrap or before I end the video here, I'm going to quickly go ahead and do one more pass. So we have this styling. We are deconstructing the text from our props. Sorry, let me just take a sip of water. We are passing text here in our props, which basically sets the text inside. We could click me to toggle anything. We could put whatever we want in here. We could remove the word altogether. And then what we're doing is we have this piece of state that handles if the button is toggled. We compute our styles dynamically based on that state. And then here in our JSX, we return a button with onClick equal to a arrow function that sets toggle to not toggle. So all it does is it actually toggles the variable. And then here on styles, we are just setting those computed styles here. And we give in the class, and then on the inside is just the text. It's as simple as that. And every time we click it, it changes. Every time we increment this, it changes. And these were two different components that theoretically, if we wanted to make more dynamic, if we wanted to make these components more versatile, then we could take them on other parts of our website if they were actually useful for whatever reason. And now we have 3 different buttons. And notice these things all carry their own state. This is the same component, but this one's black and this one's white because they all carry their own version of their own state. So that's the cool thing. And then, I could even add another increment button. This is a little bit of a contrived example, specifically the example of taking multiple of these things. But notice this clicker, for example. What if you had a clicker game where you need to have separate pieces of state? This is, a little contrived, but notice this is the concept of state in React. Now, again, my videos tend to, for some reason, go above 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and finish it up here. If you want to see more content like this, I recommend you check out the playlist, which is linked in the description. I'm uploading every 2 days. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.